Hi, Ayanah.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. For those of you that are watching, I am Lara Lara. I'm the interim director of DePaul Art Museum, and I'm here with Ayanah Moor, who is our featured artist in our For You exhibition that is up right now, both virtually and on the Fullerton CTA platform until December 28th. So yeah, Ayanah, thank you so much for joining me to answer a few questions about the work. I'm excited to have a conversation about it.
Sure thing.
So I want to kind of ease us into it a little bit. And thinking about the fact that so much of your work in the past has been really text-based in the way that the works in For You are as well. And I know that you are also kind of playing around maybe a little bit with that in some of your newer works as well, where you're taking advertisements and print copy and that kind of thing and playing around with it too. So I'm wondering if you have kind of how you approached that and got into it, and whether or not you have kind of always been a fan of word games or the idea of wordplay, and sort of how you were introduced to it.
Great question. I'm interested in wordplay about intangible things like love. And I'm also interested in what Blackness conjures for the viewer. So in For You, first I'm kind of building off of this original text that I authored, This Blackness is Just for You. And by revising it and reordering it, I'm aiming for it to yield different messages. So for me, there's like a playfulness in the rearrangement part and a kind of opportunity to play with meaning. Mm-hmm. And so I like that the statement can shift, and in a way, it's not that I'm interested in wordplay in general. I'm interested in playing with these words in particular, mm-hmm. and what that does for the viewer as they confront the text.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense then. I mean, and I guess then along those lines as well, it adds this sort of performative aspect to it in terms of how the viewer reads it, how you as the artist sort of conceptualized it as you were making them. So there is, when read, there's a performance aspect to it, but I mean, obviously there's certainly sort of a performance aspect to it in terms of how we sort of socially perform, mm-hmm. And what that means for you too within that context. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I know we've talked about that before.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really interested in language and specifically like public facing text. Mm-hmm. And I think what we do as a reader is we quietly read the text, but there's like this internal voice that we hear when we're reading. And there's a dynamic that interests me where I kind of create this index. When I use the word you, it sets up this like self-examination for the reader or the viewer, so that you might ask, what is my relationship to the text? Mm-hmm. That the you kind of has the potential to implicate you in the construction of whatever the message is. And so I'm really interested in this quality, particularly because of the movement for Black lives, popularizing this phrase, Black Lives Matter, and how frequently we see these signs that make this kind of declaration within storefront windows, private homes, painted into murals, painted on the streets as this like bold affirmation that affirm the humanity of Black people. Mm-hmm. And you know, what we know is that this is only a necessary gesture because of the legacy of unjustly killing Black people. Mm-hmm. So no matter if we're asleep in our homes or jogging or what have you, you know, we've seen this kind of play out. So for me, the sign is a compelling sign, but it's also this reminder that it would even be necessary. But also there's a quality of the sign that for me becomes a kind of passive resistance, or potentially like a well-intended gesture, but that if that's the limit of one's approach to resist or to fight injustice or to seek equality, then it's an easy one. So I'm just struck by the kind of preponderance of this kind of black made visible, and for me the For You billboards, they are in some way for me in conversation with that, even if the viewer may not think about that direct linkage. I think it adds to this visibility through text that imagines Black people.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to think about it, because I think that was one of the big things for me in talking to you early on about the project is, you know, walking through neighborhoods and seeing everybody's signs in their windows and what that actually meant versus what they were potentially doing about it. And really that sort of interesting dichotomy of having that up on the museum's building and thinking through that. And, you know, if having so many organizations and so many people that are making these declarations through signs and needing to kind of follow up and actually hold ourselves accountable. So for me, it felt like a moment of like, yes, getting that word out, but then also ensuring that, you know, we as DePaul Art Museum are also doing internally what we need to be doing in order to kind of follow up on that statement, which I think is important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just it, right? If someone, I think DPAM is a great example from my understanding. If someone were to inquire, what are your efforts beyond this sign? You could directly say, look at the mission of our organization, you know? Yeah. And there are many, I think that's one way that DPAM stands apart from other organizations, right? And so that is kind of where I'm coming from in kind of questioning what beyond this gesture. This is an important gesture to have the sign up, no doubt. But I think there is an opportunity to display what is behind that language. And so one of the variations of the text is Blackness for you just this? And there again is the wordplay for me. You know, it becomes this kind of question of how invested you are in this effort, what's your commitment to social justice, yeah, and the like.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's sort of the interesting part about the performance aspect is like how much of this is performance versus how much of this is actually actively doing something. And that's what I love about reading it too. For a lot of them, I was landing on the word just and what that emphasis looks like. I also love it that you have them up behind you too. Like
iterations of
I love it. It's helpful. But yeah, like is Blackness for you just this? Is like for you, is this just Blackness? And what that, just the ways in which putting emphasis on different words completely changes the way, not only that you perform it, but the way that you understand it.
And another layer of the wordplay is when you say, is Blackness for you just this? That there might be this slippage that sounds like justice, right? So that it has this kind of, is this all that it is? Or, you know, might you slip into equality? Might you slip into, so if there is a wordplay there, you know, those are the moments that I kind of enjoy setting that situation up for the viewer. And that there can be this literal internalizing of the text through the reading, I think is pretty compelling.
Yeah, that's great. So along those lines, let's talk about the role that Blackness plays in your work. And, you know, I know obviously they sort of situate themselves within the social commentary that's ongoing right now, but they're also, you know, deeply rooted in, you know, the conceptualizing behind color theory and the actual color Black. And we so often talk about that as, you know, as Black being the contrast to whatever a color is and kind of acting as that negative space. But with your work, there's a little bit of tension there because that Black wash in the back is really what forms the letters themselves. And so I'm curious, you know, kind of how the color Black has played into your work. And I'm also really interested in the fact that this iteration of the 4U works, you've done more of a wash than kind of a straight, bold Black in the background. So can you talk a little bit about those different iterations of it and kind of how Black operates within that context for you?
Yeah. That's a good way of framing it. I think that Black in many respects is more of a shade than a color, right? And so in terms of color theory, I think about Black as absorbing light, that is the absence of light, but it's also the thing that can emerge when all the colors are combined, that you kind of land in this kind of value that could be described as a kind of Black. And so I'm interested in that, this kind of not color, but light absorber and the combination of all colors. And then regarding my approach to the letter, I'm really interested in like activating the space around in order for the letter to take shape. Because conceptually, I think that it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting way to build the letter and to kind of build the message. As a maker, I also have more to do if I'm painting the space around the letter. And I'm interested in how much more pigment it takes for me to shape the letter that way. There are times when it's also a fun visual challenge to not write out the letters, but to find the letter through looking at the marginal space first. So there's some little visual kind of puzzling that I create for myself, which I really love. And then it's a bit of a play on words, right? Like that the marginal becomes in a way centered. That's what I'm giving my attention to. And then what remains, like, so there's a shift of what is the marginal and what's being centered in the building of the image itself, the text as image. I like that you made note of the wash, because that is a way that in revisiting this one text and expanding it by rearranging, I've also become more interested in ways that the space around the letter can actually evoke more labor. Like there's more, there are more touches on the surface in order to build up this wash. And maybe that slows the viewer down. Maybe they pay attention a little bit more possibly, or maybe they take interest in the wash as much as they do the letters. So I enjoy those kinds of things happening in my studio when I kind of reorient how to start, what to give my attention, and what fun little visual challenges can I create for myself in the making process. But yeah, it's a nice way to just reposition the way it's composed, and hopefully the content gets repositioned. Like you're looking differently is my hope.
Yeah, totally. There's something really fascinating about the way that you've described it just now in terms of that black shade operating as both kind of a light absorber, but also the buildup of how those letters come to be and the labor of the wash itself. And that now I'm beginning to think about that shade as kind of embodying a lot of weight in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Sense that it becomes this like very different physical manifestation of like weight that is carried and labored through, both in terms of social context, but also just in terms of like carrying the message of it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a lofty goal, but I get kind of caught up in the potential of a formal choice having a social commentary, right? So that's what I'm aiming for. And depending on the viewer, they might be interested, sensitive to that or not, right? It doesn't depend on it, but it is this other thing that can be happening that can reward your looking, you know? And you might kind of pay attention to the space that's not the message. But that space is actually what's defining the message.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's incredible. Awesome. Yeah. Anything else you want to add to talk about?
Well, I'll just say that it's been a really lovely run so far with the show and people commenting on it, and also just images of the work installed that are moving around social media. So it's been good. It's been a good experience.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, it has been for us too. And it's kind of one of those things where, because it's up on the CTA right now, I debated whether or not it was going to get the traction that I really hoped that it would, because there aren't that many people that are up, standing on the platform right now. But we've gotten a lot of really good responses, both from people standing on the platform that can scan the QR code to kind of get an explanation for the work.
Yeah.
And I'm loving the install photos that are floating around.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. And I'm excited too for your talk with Nate next week on December 2nd at 6 p.m.
That's right.
Moderated by Naima. I think it'd be incredible. I mean, it'll be a great discussion. So
yeah, it's going to be a treat. And I like the opportunity to talk about the way that our text functions and the kind of situation that we create around the text. So yeah, it'll be fun.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ayanah. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Talk again soon.
Okay.
Bye.